My name's Sam Timms,
Now I'm Eric Fleming.
and this is another episode of Function Junction. So today we're gonna change things up a little bit. For those of you who have watched our previous videos, this screen here is gonna be weird and new looking, and for a good reason, because this is Amazon's Hours service. I think some people call it AWS, and basically, we wanted to take a look at the last function that we wrote on Azure Functions and try it in an AWS scenario and see what it would be like to do that. So for those of you who don't remember the last one, we were sending mail using SendGrid. So I think we were reading a message from a queue and then just sending it using SendGrid.
Yep.
So we're going to try and do the same sort of thing with AWS. So I've logged into the AWS portal here, and to start with, I've just created a brand new function here. So the inside of AWS, functions are called Lambdas, and then underneath that you have a function. And one of the other weird things you have to get used to in AWS is that under Azure, the top level of anything, of any like division inside of Azure, is that you have a service type. So a function is a type, and then within that you have a bunch of functions, and they each live within a region. In AWS, regions are the top level thing, so you have to make sure that you pick the right region, and then inside of that you can build a bunch of functions. So personally, I find that super confusing because there's a million regions, and if you're like, oh, I wrote this function, but I don't remember which region I put it in, well, you're going to be spending the next 10 minutes clicking through regions to find it.
Right.
Anyway, so there are a bunch of equivalent services on AWS and Azure, and one that we want to start with here is just sending a simple message to this service. So it turns out there's no easy way to do that. Azure, or AWS rather, have this thing called SQS, which is a simple queuing service. So the closest comparison on Azure to that is storage queues, not service bus queues. Service bus queues are way better than anything that exists on AWS. So what we need to do then is we can use SNS, which is a simple notification service.
Okay.
And this is almost a queue, but it's actually like a pub sub system. So a bunch of different things can subscribe to the same topic within an SNS and receive notification on it. So this is similar to service bus topics that you would find in Azure, but again, nowhere near as good. So unfortunately, there's no like point-to-point protocol that we can use. There's no like SQS thing that you can do. You can build something that like listens in on SQS queues, and then when it happens, it can publish new events on SNS. So the best advice that I've seen people do is that they use CloudWatch events to do it. And so you can configure CloudWatch to watch an SQS queue and then like rebroadcast it on SQS. But unfortunately, SQS, CloudWatch looks at it, republishes it on SNS, and then the Lambda picks that up, which is super simple, as you can see. But the thing with using the CloudWatch stuff is the only way to do that is really to have a timer on it. So if you want something that happens quickly, that's not going to work very well, especially because the timer resolution is like a minute at best. So
So what would happen if you don't have anything in there for that minute? Like, do you still get, it's probably charged by, there's probably some credit that gets accrued when you do that. Like, are you still being charged for that?
Yeah, I think you'd probably still be charged for that monitoring process. So that's somewhere that I feel like this service falls down a little bit.
Right.
But anyway, we'll just carry on with this here. So once you have the SNS thing selected, then it's pretty easy to pick a topic that you listen to. So we'll listen to prod send mail here. And then we want to output something. And so you can choose a bunch of different languages here. So there is support for .NET Core 2, which is what we're going to use, but there's also support for a bunch of other languages as well.
Right.
So we see the same sorts of things in Azure Functions as well. They have first-class support for Java and JavaScript. Python? I don't remember about Python. What problem?
I think they're working on it, actually.
Yeah. So anyway, let's pop over to Visual Studio here, and we're gonna go and recreate our function. So I did a file new project, and I have the AWS templates installed here, so I could just do like a file new Lambda function, and this is basically what you get out of it when you kick it off. And then we can jump over and do all of the same package management stuff that we did on the other one. So this is actually a .NET Core 2 project. So I can do install package and then wait for tab completion to wake up. And we need send grid. And I feel like in order to do it, we also used Newtonsoft. It's always like a comedy routine.
Makes sense.
For like, how long can I get away with not using Newtonsoft on a project?
Not very long.
Yeah, usually it's within the first 15 minutes that I end up installing it. Okay, so send grid and then Newtonsoft. JSON. Okay. All right, away we go. So I'm gonna cheat a little bit here, and I'm gonna pull some stuff over from another project that I have in the background here, so we don't have to watch me type everything out. So I'm gonna pull over some message deserialization stuff here. And I'm gonna change this here to be an SN event, which I don't know if I have the right namespace stuff installed here for it. Doesn't look like it. So I'll run and install that in a second. I'll just finish resolving the rest of these. And so we need a message contract that we need to pull in here. So let's go and steal that too from my other project. Messages are pretty simple, just a POCO object.
Mm-hmm.
Here, and push that right there. So same message object that we were using previously. And that package is, I think, called this. I need to install to get that namespace. That looks like I got that.
That looks good. Maybe.
Still didn't like that. Pretty sure that's. We just took a second to get the namespace in. Let's go use it explicitly. There we go.
There it goes. Yep.
Not all copass. Return a value. Okay. I don't think I actually need to return a value here, but I think I want this to be async. Async. And we'll return a task from that. It's always a good plan to return a task from a async function for various reasons that I won't get into right now. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to pull the event from SNS. We're going to deserialize the message off of it, and then we're going to pass it into our send mail function, which is going to be pretty similar to what we had on Azure. Now, right away, I think there's some interesting differences here in that we're explicitly referencing the sort of object that's coming in. So if you wanted to have the same kind of piece of code with a bunch of different entry points, if you look at this from like the Azure side, then you would just change this on the binding side. You wouldn't really need to change any of the code because all of that like message serialization, deserialization stuff happens in the background for you. Whereas here you have to be a little bit more explicit about it. So if I was to decide I don't want this to be an SNS event anymore, I want it to fire from a CloudWatch event, then that would be an actual code change that I had to do as opposed to more of like a configuration change that you'd see on the Azure side.
Yeah.
But it's not like outrageously different. I don't know that there's one that I'm like more in love with than the other one.
Okay.
And we're going to go out and get the API key, and we're going to get that directly from an environment variable. So when you go and deploy one of these Lambda functions, and I think this is a nice place that Azure could use some improvement. function here. What do we call that new one? Mail sender. Then in the next step, you can go and define a bunch of variables right here for it. So this is the same thing that you would get with app settings inside of Azure.
Right.
So that would be nice if this sort of thing was exposed, that you could kind of go and populate the environment variables directly from the deployment. But we really shouldn't be right-click deploying anyway, so...
You don't like right-click publish?
I like it for demo purposes. For production code, I don't like that. One of the other things I found that I had to do was increase the timeout here up to... I just went to 30 seconds. I think you could get away with 15. And that's just because the first time through, there's a bunch of like jitting that needs to be done on the code. So the first time through is kind of slow, and then after that it seems to pick up and speed up. So I don't know how this stuff works in the background, like if they keep these functions memory resident or how that works. But certainly the first time was painfully slow, and then each subsequent run seemed just fine.
Yeah, I was going to ask about like if you noticed or knew anything about like the kind of the startup time of the function, like, or the Lambda.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I know there is a blog post that I will link in the show notes below that's making its rounds at the moment, talking about the relative performance of Lambda versus Azure Functions. And it does not come out well for Azure Functions. So I think there are some real scalability issues that the functions team needs to look at on that. Largely it was around the speed of scale out. So with like AWS Lambdas, they scale up pretty swiftly. So as your load increases, the number of functions goes up in a pretty smooth curve.
Right.
Whereas on Azure, it's a really kind of like stepwise function that goes up, and they kind of like add another machine to the group that has those functions deployed on them, and then everything's fine for a second, and then as the load increases, the machine starts getting slow, and then it takes a while to spin up another one. And I think, and this is my like total outsider guess on how functions work, and I haven't talked to anyone on the team about this, but my suspicion is that because functions is built on what is effectively a website scaling system, that it's probably not quite sensitive enough to spinning up new functions or new instances of the function. Like if you're going to spin up a new instance of a website or a web app, it's kind of a heavyweight process. So you could potentially be deploying multiple megabytes of code. You could be doing all sorts of startup stuff to warm up the server before you put it into rotation. For a function, it should in theory be very quick and very lightweight, and there shouldn't be a whole lot there. So it feels to me like the kind of knobs that you need to adjust for how sensitive you are to starting up a new function, it should be set to a much lower level than for starting up an entire website. But that would be a good question to ask the team.
And I think we even noticed it a little bit in one of our previous videos when we were presenting to the Austin user group. When we watched our Azure Functions kind of scale out, it got to a point where the response times were getting bad, and then it almost looked like it, kind of took a break for a second while it was spinning up the new functions, and then it leveled off once the new function had spun up. But it definitely took, some amount of time to spin that up in order to start handling the load a little bit better. So I think we definitely noticed that.
But once you get to this point, like uploading the code is no problem. It gets up there nicely. Everything runs really nicely. I don't have a demo set up, unfortunately, for actually sending a message to SNS because it sucks. Certainly sending messages to, say, an Azure service or an Azure storage queue or even a service bus queue is way easier than sending to an SNS topic, just in terms of the amount of code that you have to write.
Yes.
But eventually this will push out and we'll be able to see it. Error uploading the function. Oh no. Okay, so it's just upset. Also, I ran into this last time too, actually, that I go to upload it and it has some problems because it can't find some of these libraries that's pulled in, and I think it's just because I haven't actually run a compile.
Does it actually use the local files to push those?
I think so. So I'm pretty sure that's my problem here. And it's actually squiggled these things in red, so I'm wondering if maybe by uploading it without compiling it, I might have overwritten some of the project stuff that was just in memory. We'll see if this works or not. Well, it looks like it's happy enough. Let's try uploading it again and see. So that's a little bit of a bug in the tooling. I think they just need to execute a save before they do an upload.
Yeah. So while this is uploading, I had a question about some of the local development. So like right here, it looks like we're pushing it up to, quote unquote production. But like if you wanted to test something like this locally, like a Lambda function locally, like how does that, have you done it? How does it compare to a function?
I have not tried it explicitly, but I did find this article here talking about how to actually do that. So it looks like there is kind of a local environment for testing out Lambdas, but it is in beta, so I don't know how good it is. And even just kind of skimming through it, it looks a lot more complicated than I would expect to see for something like this.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of my biggest thing with Lambdas. Like we actually, the company that I work for and our current client is actually in AWS. And so I don't actually get to play with functions in my day-to-day job, but developing some of the, features that we do for our client, it's kind of a pain because a lot of it, like we have to set up a local queue that is actually out, running live that we're still paying for, so we don't really turn it on for testing. If we want to try to do some sort of integration testing with, we could set something up locally to push something into a queue or an S3 bucket or anything like that. We can't really do that. And I mean, it looks like it's coming maybe with a beta, but I mean, we've been on it for over, almost 2 years now. And we haven't done a lot with Lambda kind of because of that, because there is no good local development story. And hopefully it gets better because it would be nice, because we're locked into AWS. And I would love to be able to use something like Lambda because it is like functions. So, hopefully that kind of improves a little bit.
So it looks like it deployed nicely that time.
Nice.
And if I jump over here, I think that I don't know if it tells me that everything's necessarily updated, but it is out there. And there is the ability to test it kind of from within Visual Studio, but it does still go out to the cloud to do the call, which is probably fine in most scenarios unless you happen to be on an airplane. Which I feel like every time I think that that's a silly scenario, I end up on an airplane wanting to do stuff like this. So I must not have saved it. It ate my SNS. Trigger. Add, I guess. This always makes me laugh. Like it's called new trigger 1 until you save it, and then it names it.
There it goes.
So I think that's pretty much it. Like the environment is similar enough that I don't think there's one that I would say is head and shoulders above the rest. The developer experience, I think, is better on Azure than it is on AWS.
Right.
But the scalability stuff is better on Lambda than it is on functions. So if that is a scenario that you're going to have, that you're using serverless because you want to be able to scale really quickly, then maybe Lambda is better for that scenario at the moment. But if there's one thing I've seen out of the functions team is that they are pretty quick to take on board and internalize any of this critique, and they're probably going to come up with something, unless that something requires HTTP2, in which case you're screwed, because that is never ever coming to app services. You laugh, but I own HTTP supported on the app.
Yeah.
Appservicesyet.com.
I've been there. I think there's something out there. I think I upvoted something for this too.
I hope so. Okay, so I think that's everything that I wanted to run through with this. Feel free to leave some comments below, and we can talk about that in a subsequent video if you have something to tell us about. I will make sure to link that blog post about performance, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.
All right, everyone. Thank you.
All right.